Hello. Can everyone hear me? Hi, welcome to Perry World House. I'm Lauren Anderson. I'm the Director of Programs here, and it's truly a joy to see all of you here with us today. For those of you who are new to our space, Perry World House is Penn's hub for global engagement, and we aim to bridge the worlds of policy and academia by connecting scholars, students, and practitioners to tackle some of the most pressing issues of our time. One of the ways we do this is through public events like this. These gatherings are designed to bring the Penn community and our friends beyond campus into conversations about critical challenges. The goal is always the same: to foster dialogue that is timely, substantive, interdisciplinary, and to give all of us a chance to deepen our understanding of the world we share. In that spirit, I'm delighted, especially delighted, to welcome you to today's event. We will explore how we will power the future. Our focus is on South Korea, its experience, its leadership in technology and innovation, and the lessons it offers us all. This conversation will touch on some of the most vital issues of our time: the energy transition, national security, technological development, the dynamics of global competition, and the economics of our collective future. These are big questions, and they require us to think across disciplines, and they require diverse expertise. It's exactly the kind of conversation, one that is open to new ideas and perspectives, that we strive to host here at Perry World House. So before we get started, I want to extend my deep gratitude to our co-sponsors, the Wharton Korea Club and the James Joo Jin Kim Center for Korean Studies. The collaborations like this between students, faculty, and institutions, they make our work possible, and they bring fresh perspectives to our programming. I'd also like to thank each of you for taking time to be here. I know the semester is very busy and very hectic, so we're grateful to see you. So with that, I'm pleased to hand things over to Hyun Yang of the Wharton Korea Club. He's worked with such dedication and vision to bring today's event to fruition. So let's welcome Hyun to the stage. Thank you.
Thank you, Lauren. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Hyun Yang, and I am a second-year MBA student at the Wharton School. It is a privilege to welcome you to today's event and introduce our speakers. Our moderator today is Dr. Ben Schmidt. Dr. Schmidt is a senior fellow here at Penn, where he holds a joint academic appointment between the Department of Physics and Astronomy and at the Kleinman Center for Energy Policy. He is also a senior fellow at Perry World House. At Penn, Schmidt focuses on the development and deployment of the Simons Observatory, a new set of experimental cosmology telescopes and energy support infrastructure in the Atacama Desert in northern Chile. He also pursues research and teaching within the Kleinman Center related to European energy security, critical infrastructure protection, export controls policies, and modern sanctions regimes. At Perry World House, Dr. Schmidt focuses on national security analysis focused on the transatlantic community and in the Indo-Pacific, as well as emerging space security challenges. And finally, it is an honor to introduce our distinguished guest and speaker, Minister Young-Sun Park, a trailblazer who has combined leadership in public service, policymaking, and global affairs. Minister Park has served as South Korea's Minister of SMEs and Startups, where she championed innovation and entrepreneurship as critical engines of national growth. Before that, she spent 4 terms in the National Assembly, where she made history as the first woman to serve as floor leader of the major opposition party and later chaired the Legislation and Judiciary Committee. She has been recognized as one of the most influential women in South Korea, and her work has consistently underscored the connection between policy, innovation, and democratic values. At a time when technology, economics, and geopolitics are deeply intertwined, Minister Park's insights could not be timelier. Please join me in welcoming our guests to the stage.
Hello, everyone. It's a great pleasure to meet you. It's an honor to lecture at this historical university. Today, my topic is the birth of universe, the birth of life, and the birth of AI. 50 years ago, an MIT computer scientist named Edward Fredkin said, there are three great mysteries in history: the formation of the universe, the beginning of the life, and the emergence of AI. He meant the three biggest events in the universe's 13.8 billion year history are the birth of the universe, the birth of life, and the birth of AI. When I heard this, I felt a powerful emotion. How do you feel? Do you agree? Yes or no? Okay. You are now at the beginning of one of three great events, the birth of AI. The fact alone shows how much our lives will change. It's a very exciting time. Here's a photo of Fifth Avenue in New York City from over 100 years ago. The picture of the left is from 1900. It shows one car in the small red circle among many horse-drawn carriages. The picture on the right is from 1913. It shows one carriage in the small red circle among many cars. It took 13 years for society to switch from carriage to cars. The smartphone was created in 2007. The smartphone is 18 years old this year. It took about 10 years for smartphones to take over the world. ChatGPT came out more than 2.5 years ago. It will soon be 3 years old. AI is changing our world at the speed of light. Last May, President Donald Trump visited the Middle East. His focus wasn't on oil. It was on AI chips. He signed AI chip agreements with Saudi Arabia and the UAE. He sold 18,000 AI chips to Saudi Arabia. He made a deal to export 500,000 H100 GPUs to the UAE by 2027. In return, these two countries will invest over $200 billion in the US over the next 10 years. AI chips are now a strategic resource as important as oil. President Trump announced an AI action plan in July. It has three main parts. First, build an AI ecosystem with US allies, promote US-led global AI standards, and share them with allied countries. Second, make it easier to build data centers by simplifying federal permits and reducing environmental rules. Third, prevent woke AI by ensuring ideological neutrality and avoiding bias. For example, diversity-focused progressivism. David Sachs, a former venture capitalist and the White House AI and cryptocurrency advisor, said, AI is a revolutionary technology that can transform the global economy and shift the balance of power in the world. Secretary of State Marco Rubio said, winning the AI race is not negotiable. The US must stay dominant in AI to boost prosperity and protect our economy and national security. The Trump administration sees AI as a key battleground in the US-China rivalry. We are moving from an oil economy to an AI economy. Professor Willy Landrop-Volta from Oxford University predicts computing power will become a strategic resource as valuable as oil. What is the core technology of computing power? It's on semiconductors. Since World War II, semiconductors have been key to America's power. America's investment in semiconductors started after losing the Vietnam War. In Vietnam, the US dropped 864,000 tons of bombs over 3 years during Operation Rolling Thunder. This was more than in the Korean War. But they still lost. Why? Because of inaccuracy. The hit rate was only 9.2%. One of 100 bombs, 90 missed the target. The US realized they could no longer win wars with traditional mass-produced weapons. After the Vietnam War, US began developing guided weapons to increase accuracy. They added sensors and communication devices to existing weapons. These devices are now used in kids' toys, cars, and home appliances with remote control. The key is accuracy. To be accurate, you need to calculate precisely. That's what a semiconductor is. A semiconductor is a calculator. So, the DARPA project was created under the Department of Defense in 1972. Its goal to create technologies that didn't exist yet. The internet, GPS, and drones all came from the DARPA project. The President Robert Kennedy's Moonshot project was also a part of this. Launching a rocket into space also requires semiconductors and precise calculations. About 20 years later, these efforts paid off in the Gulf War. In 1990, Operation Desert Storm started. Guided weapons like the Tomahawk missile and stealth aircraft appeared. They showed their power by hitting key targets in Iraq with precision. The world was shocked. The hit rate was 59.1%. Most countries felt they could no longer resist the US. The recent airstrike on Iran's nuclear facility was called Operation Midnight Hammer. The mission aimed to destroy underground nuclear sites with precision, speed, and survivability. At the heart of it was advanced semiconductor technology. Military power now depends on semiconductor supply chains, design, and manufacturing. Today, defense power equals semiconductor power. Let's go back to the 1990s story. In December 1991, the Soviet Union collapsed. This photo shows me a young, beautiful person doing a live broadcast from Moscow to Seoul. Maybe this is over 40 years ago, yeah? At that time, I was the first Korean journalist sent to Moscow. Korea and the Soviet Union did not have diplomatic relations then. Gorbachev's Soviet Union cried out for glasnost and perestroika. In that society, even a pack of Marlboro cigarettes or a pair of women's stockings from America could change the impossible into the possible. Life was that hard for the Soviet people. The US thought they had conquered the world. A 30 years period of American dominance began. The US pushed for globalization and free trade. They thought their market would grow bigger. With this idea, they let China join the WTO in 2001. At that time, Europe opposed this. China's WTO entry was to seed of its challenge to America. This provided a path for private companies to enter China's semiconductor market because WTO required China to meet global standards. Before, private participation in key technologies was not allowed in China. 10 years after joining the WTO in 2010, China passed the US to become the world's #1 country in manufacturing. In 2021, China's manufacturing made up over 30% of the world total. The trade between the US and China grew from just 1 billion in 1980 to over 600 billion in 2023. In early August, 1 month ago, the US declared the end of the WTO system. US Trade Representative Jamieson Greer announced the Thornberry system would replace the 30-year-old WTO. Thornberry is the name of a Trump-owned resort in Scotland, where a trade deal with the EU was announced and 2 bilateral talks with Korea were held. This was a clear signal that a Trump round of trade is beginning. On the other hand, on September 1st, Shanghai Cooperation Organization, SCO, led by China and Russia, adopted a joint declaration. They expressed concern about risks to global supply chains, a reference to Trump tariffs policy and protectionism. Indian Prime Minister Modi also joined. The declaration opposes unilateral measures that violate WTO rules and principles. Such a movement is also extending to BRICS with the participation of Brazil, Argentina, Egypt, and Iran, etc. 30 years ago, the US promoted a WTO system centered on free trade. Ironically, now it is China that stands at the center. Professor Stephen Ward of Harvard Kennedy School says, America's strategy over the last 30 years failed in 4 ways. First, forcing democracy on other countries like in Iraq. Second, the globalization strategy of pushing free trade. Third, ignoring the climate crisis. Fourth, underestimating China's growth. Now, 30 years later, the US faces a challenge from China. The US has brought back protectionism. President Trump is using tariffs to shake up the world. In 2015, China's President Xi Jinping announced his semiconductor rise plan. He planned to invest 1 trillion yuan each year until 2025. The goal was to increase China's semiconductor self-sufficiency from 15% to 70%. This was a clear goal to win the semiconductor power race against the US. The US began to put pressure on China. This started in 2017 with Trump's first term. But my experience tells me that pressure creates new things based on determination. From 2019 to 2021, when I was Minister of SMEs and Startups Korea and startups in Republic of Korea, Korea and Japan has a trade dispute. Japan suddenly stopped exporting 3 key items for semiconductor production, including hydrogen fluoride, photoresist, polyimide. At first, we were very surprised, but we came together. Companies and the government worked as one to overcome this crisis. We met every morning at 7 a.m. with the ministers of related departments. We discussed how to replace imports with Korean-made products. If that was too difficult, we looked for other sources. Instead of Japan, we tried to import from Europe or other countries. In the end, we succeeded in making those items ourselves. I worry the US-China conflict might follow the same path. Recently, news spread that Alibaba in China developed a new AI chip to replace NVIDIA's chips. After that, US semiconductor company stocks dropped sharply. This shows signs of result similar to the trade dispute between Korea and Japan. AI is now entering its third phase. AI has gone through perception AI, is now in the age of agentic AI, and is stepping into the next frontier, physical AI. Let me illustrate the stage of AI evolution using China as an example. The first phase was perception AI, like CD Brain in Hangzhou and Shanghai. The second phase was agentic AI, which includes Manus and DeepSeek. DeepSeek is helping to drive agentic AI in China. Overall, China's market for this type of AI is growing fast. Even with US sanctions, China is building its own AI ecosystem. This is based on open source and cost-effective solutions. When the third phase of physical AI fully arrives, it will be hard to say who is ahead, the US or China. This is especially true because China will use lower cost to gain a price advantage in robotics. The Robot Olympic Olympics in China last August showed the rise of the physical AI era. The focus is still on visual effects and hardware with weak intelligence and practical use. But just as the US once underestimated China's growth, we should not make the same mistake again. This is a map of global AI computing centers. They are mostly in the Northern Hemisphere. Only 32 countries have AI computing centers. The US and China operate over 90% of them. More than 150 countries do not have an AI computing center. The world will be divided into countries with AI and those without. Countries with high performance computing, countries with high performance computing will become new world power. To keep its semiconductor power, the US needs a cooperative strategy with East Asian countries like Korea. This will help them compete on price with China. They need to work together with Korea's manufacturing power, Japan's materials and equipment, and Taiwan's AI factories. Therefore, the US should be flexible with its tariff policies. At China's Victory Day event in early September, Xi Jinping, Putin, and Kim Jong-un, North Korea, appeared together. The first such meeting in over 60 years. This shows a counterweight to the US-Korea-Japan alliance. The US should be cautious about treating the alliance only in cost terms. Too much pressure on Korea could slow growth and cause public discontent. That is why future US, Korea, Japan talks must be more friendly, strategic, and serious. To end my lecture, I want to emphasize one more time, you are the main character opening this new AI era. So you really have many things to do. Become the leaders of the AI era. A life without AI will soon not be possible. There is no life without AI. Thank you.
Well, Minister, thank you so much for that really whirlwind of foreign policy, national security, and all tying that into the role of semiconductors and AI in our global geoeconomic and geopolitical landscape we see today. I really have to say, as an astrophysicist first and foreign policy practitioner second, it's always great to see a comment about 13.8 billion year old universe as the start of this. We work on experimental cosmology here at Penn doing that, so that's great. And of course, the callbacks to the Apollo program. We're clearly at an inflection point in terms of where AI is going, and also its role in our ally relationships with the United States, with our partners and allies worldwide, and of course, as you said, in the Indo-Pacific region. You made a very strong call, and I think I'll start with this. You made a very strong call for a more constructive dialogue and relationship with the United States between, the United States, Japan, and South Korea in particular. There was a leadership summit at the White House recently where there was a friendly welcome in the White House. There was also social media that was kind of going the other direction beforehand. And of course, we've also have the elephant in the room of the Hyundai plant and the situation there. So maybe could you maybe comment on that and where things are going with those issues? And is that something we can get beyond in the U.S. South Korea bilateral relationship between Washington and Seoul?
네, 그 최근에 있었던 그 조지아에서의 그 현대와 LG 배터리 공장의 그 사건은 대한민국 국민들한테 굉장히 큰 충격을 안겨다 주었습니다.
It was a major shock to the Korean people, what happened down in Georgia at the Hyundai LG plant. 대한민국이 그동안 2020년대부터 지금까지 그 대한민국의 그 빅 컴퍼니들이 투자 액수가 1,000억 불을 지금 넘어서고 있는 그런 상황입니다. 네. So the investment from the South Korean companies, the big ones, since 2020, I would say is in excess of 100 billion US dollars.
그런 상황에서 이런 어떤 그 공장을 짓는 데 필요한 인력과 관련된 문제는 미국과 한국 사이에 좀 더 진지한 논의가 필요하다라고 생각합니다.
Having said that, I think we need more conversations as to who needs to be there to build this plant.
왜냐하면은 똑같은 반도체 칩을 예를 들면 똑같은 반도체 칩을 생산하는데 한국에서는 10불이 드는 경우에 이것을 미국에서 생산하면은 그 여러 가지 인력 문제라든가 그다음 인건비 문제 그다음에 또 여러 자재 문제 등 때문에 20불 그러니까 2배 이상의 값이 드는 그러한 어려움을 알면서도 지금 저희가 미국에 투자를 하고 있는 것이기 때문에 그렇습니다.
Let me give you an example. We know when we are trying to build semiconductor chips, it may require $10 in personnel and the supplies, and the same chip to be produced here in the U.S. would require $20, so it twice what it costs in Korea, and we know that. But having that knowledge does not stop us from investing in the U.S. for many reasons.
한국은 2006년도에 한미 FTA를 체결했을 때도 미국의 글로벌라이제이션 정책에 적극적으로 협조를 했던 나라이고 그리고 최근에 들어와서 미국이 대미 투자를 원하는 어떤 그러한 팔러시를 지속적으로 가져감에 있어서 거기에도 굉장히 그 동맹국으로서 굉장히 적극적인 태도를 보이고 있는 나라 중에 하나입니다. 네.
When Korea entered into Korea-U.S. Free Trade Agreement with the U.S., we were an ardent supporter of the U.S. ambition for globalization. We wanted to be an active partner of the U.S. And since then, U.S. also asked us to join them and invest heavily in the U.S. And we said, yes, we will gladly invest in the U.S.
그렇기 때문에 앞으로 한국과 미국 사이에 그런 어떤 전문 인력과 관련된 인력에 대한 비자 문제가 투자 이전에 우선되어야 하는 것이 아닌가 그렇게 생각하고 있습니다.
So we are willing to invest the money, and we also need some people to run the factories. These are the skilled workers we need to bring into the U.S.
제가 알기로는 미국에서도 이러한 어떤 전문 인력의 문제를 굉장히 심각하게 생각하고 있는데 이것은 단시간 내에 전문 인력을 키울 수 있는 것은 아닙니다. 시간을 필요로 하는 것이기 때문에 그러한 관점에서 한국이 미국에 투자하고 공장을 짓는 것과 관련된 그런 전문 인력과 관련해서는 앞으로는 이런 비자 문제 같은 것을 좀 더 신중하게 접근할 필요가 있지 않나 이렇게 생각하고 있습니다.
The people we need to bring in from Korea are not day laborers. These are skilled, highly skilled engineers. And the skills that they have are something that you cannot develop overnight. You actually need a lot of time to mature in the technology and the skills that are needed to be trained here in the U.S. for the other workers to also follow in their steps. So this is something that there has to be a crossing of the professionals between the two countries.
Well, thank you. And I think that I just want to kind of now broaden that question out. That's certainly indicative of the U.S.-Korea relationship right now. You wrote a book called Semiconductor Sovereignty, and I really find it interesting that the word sovereignty is in that title in the context of kind of the broader trade dynamics that you've mentioned in your talk. Obviously, the U.S. led liberal international order includes the support of the creation of the WTO and bringing our partners and allies into a global free trade system. And we seem to be having that this kind of revanchism or backsliding to protectionism that we saw earlier in the 20th century. How do you view the dynamics to get us beyond this, to get us to a balance where we can balance national security and economic sovereignty on one side with the basically the getting beyond the tariffs and the various trade threats and things like this that we see now.
네, 물론 어떤 그 관세와 그다음에 그 국가의 그 안보와 관련된 데 따른 어떤 그런 밸런스가 정책적으로 굉장히 중요한 거는 맞습니다.
I agree. Tariffs and national security, these are policy-driven agenda.
특히 이제 미국이 달러의 기축 통화를 유지하기 위해서는 이미 1959년도부터 지적이 됐던 트리핀 딜레마, 그러니까 다시 말하면 전 세계의 그 무역을 유지하기 위해서 미국은 무역 적자를 쌓을 수밖에 없는 그런 어떤 그 모순된 구조를 계속 가지고 와야 되는 그런 상황이기 때문에 지금 미국이 어떤 돌파구를 마련해야 된다는 것은 저도 한편으로는 이해하는 편입니다.
I do understand that as the global currency for the U.S. to continue to have dollar as the mainstay as the global currency, there needs to be some deficit that the U.S. has to incur so that every country are relying on the dollar.
이 리저브 커런시를 유지한다는 것은 굉장히 그 여러 가지 그 모순을 갖고 있기 때문에 역사적으로 보면 1970년대에 닉슨 대통령이 근본위제를 철폐했던 것도 이런 어떤 트리핀 딜레마에서 극복하기 위한 하나의 방편이었고, 또 1990년대 말에 한국을 비롯한 아시아들이 IMF를 겪을 수밖에 없었고, 그것으로 인해서 미국이 어떠한 약간 부를 축적할 수 있는 어떤 그런 숨구멍을 마련하는 것, 그런 것도 하나의 이러한 흐름 중에 하나입니다. 그래서 미국의 무역 적자가 계속해서 쌓여가는 것은 이 기축 통화를 유지하는 데 따른 모순인데, 이 모순을 극복하기 위해서 이번에 트럼프 대통령이 관세 정책을 들고 나왔다. 저는 이렇게 생각하고 있습니다.
The way I look at the tariff of the Trump administration is that it was born out of the necessity. The U.S. currency has been and is the reserve currency of the world. And back when the U.S. had gold standard and when Nixon scrapped it, it was necessary because the U.S. was having difficulty holding on to its status under the gold standard. And once it's turned into just dollars only and paper currency, the U.S. went into another difficult period in the 90s when there was a currency crisis met by the Asian countries, including Korea. We call it the IMF crisis in Korea. And what these indicate is that there's a certain need for a deficit to be incurred by the U.S. in order for the U.S. to continue to hold on to the dollar as the reserve currency. And that is the paradox that Mr. Trump is facing now. And that's the way I see it. And that is why he thought that perhaps tariffs is the solution, a way out of the paradox that they are in.
그러나 이번에 트럼프의 관세 정책은 동맹국과 그렇지 않은 나라를 구별하지 않고 무차별적으로 관세를 부과하고 때때로는 이것이 약간 보복성 관세의 성격을 띈다는 데에 대해서 많은 문제점이 있다라고 생각하고 있습니다.
However, I must state, and with some chagrin, that this has been applied to allies and non-allies indiscriminately and sometimes as a retaliatory measure.
예를 들면 미국이 취한 반도체 정책 가운데 중국의 제재를 가함으로써 한국이 그것을 같이 팔로우업하는 과정에서 일어난 예를 한 가지 들어드리도록 하겠습니다.
Now, let me give you an example of what happened in the U.S. pursuit of sanctioning of the Chinese regime.
한국의 중국에 대한 반도체 수출은 전체 수출의 약 40%를 차지하고 있었는데 미국의 생션에 한국이 동참함으로써 이 수출 액수가 30%대로 줄어들었습니다.
Korea traditionally had exported about 40% of its exports to China. However, because Korea was working with the U.S. in sanctioning China, the Korean export to Chinese government or Chinese people have decreased to 30% of the Korean exports.
한국과 미국은 서로 동맹 관계이지만 한국의 미국에 대한 반도체 수출은 그동안 7%밖에 기록되지 않고 있습니다.
We are allies between the U.S. and Korea. However, Korea's semiconductor export to the U.S. was only at about 7%.
그러면 한국의 입장에서 봤을 때는 중국의 수출이 10%가량 줄어든 것에 대한 어떤 보상을 어디선가 받아야 되는데 한국은 그 보상을 전혀 받고 있지 못하는 이런 상황에 미국으로부터 또 관세에 대한 부담까지 안게 되면 한국의 경제 성장은 어려워질 수밖에 없다는 것은 너무나 명확합니다.
So after losing 10% of its exports to China, there has to be something that makes up for the loss that Korea was sustaining because Korea was sanctioning China together with the U.S., but nothing was compensated. So we are at a loss, actually. Every time we work with the U.S., we end up losing more.
한국의 올해 경제 성장률은 1%가 되지 않습니다. 0.8 이 정도가 예상이 되고 있습니다. 그렇게 되면 한국인들의 삶이 점점 어려워질 것이고 또 한국인들의 삶이 어려워지면 그만큼 불만도 많아질 것입니다.
Korean GDP is expected to grow by about 0.8% this year. It's not a whole lot. And the Korean lives are becoming more miserable by the moment because of that. And if this were to continue, we would have more people who would be unhappy.
그래서 그런 어떤 한국 국민들의 불만이 쌓이게 되면 또 이것이 사회적으로 이상한 방향으로 분출될 가능성도 배제할 수가 없습니다.
And there is a possibility that the Korean people, as the dissatisfaction mount in South Korea, that this would be erupting in a way that we actually did not anticipate.
그렇기 때문에 트럼프 어드미니스트레이션에서의 그 타리프스 정책은 동맹국에 관해서는 뭔가 좀 약간 그 페이버한 면을 느낄 수 있도록 이것이 취해지는 것이 앞으로의 그 여러 가지 그 펼쳐지는 지정학적인 상황에서 이것이 필요하지 않나 저는 그렇게 생각하고 있습니다.
So as to the tariffs by Mr. Trump and his administration, you need to treat the allies like allies. And when you consider the geopolitics, you're not just alienating the country, but you're also alienating the people of that country.
Thank you. So I take it that you have a significant amount of concern about the current U.S. Political environment pushing South Korea away from the United States. Of course, we've seen this recently, similar sort of narratives and concerns around India being pushed towards the Russia-China,
Yeah.
North Korea axis with tariffs that have been placed on India for its purchase of Russian oil products and going against the price cap and sanctions and things like this. Do you think it's inevitable that when we saw that visual in Beijing a few weeks ago of Xi and Putin and Kim Jong-un standing there together among other authoritarian nations in the world, do you think it's inevitable that market segmentation from an economic standpoint is going to follow and basically be entrenched for decades to come? And if so, how does the United States and its partners and allies react to that, and how do we stick together rather than have this adversarial approach?
굉장히 저는 9월 3일인가요? 9월 3일 날 있었던 그 중국에서 있었던 시진핑, 푸틴 그리고 김정은의 만남은 매우 아주 시리어스한 그 이벤트였다라고 생각하고 있습니다. 네.
Was it 9/3 that this victory parade had occurred? I believe the meeting amongst Xi and Putin and Kim Jong-un was a very serious event.
그것은 제가 조금 전에도 강의에서 말씀드렸지만 60년 만에 처음 있었던 일입니다.
As I mentioned in my presentation, first time in 60 years that this had occurred.
그동안에 북한은 북한이 러시아와 가까워지면 중국은 그것을 좋아하지 않았습니다.
When North Korea gets close to Russia, obviously China is not happy with that.
왜냐하면 중국하고 북한은 핵 문제를 놓고 서로 경쟁 관계에 있기 때문에 더욱 그렇습니다.
Especially because when it comes to nuclear, North Korea and China are actually competing with each other.
그리고 북한의 김정은의 경우에는 중국을 두려워했었습니다.
There was a time when Kim Jong-un feared China.
트럼프 1기에서 한국과 미국과 북한이 함께 만났을 때도 그 만남이 이루어지게 된 그 배경에는 북한의 김정은이 중국을 두려워하는 그러한 것들을 해소시켜주는 그러한 것도 상당히 작용을 했었기 때문에 그 만남이 이루어졌던 것입니다.
Back in the first term of Trump, Korea, U.S., and North Korea had a meeting together, and in the background, the backdrop was the fear that Kim Jong-un had of China.
그 가운데에는 핵 문제가 있는데 그 핵 문제가 어떤 식으로 그 중국과 러시아한테 해석이 되냐 하면은 러시아의 경우에는 중국을 직접 컨트롤할 수 없기 때문에 북한을 통해서 컨트롤할 수 있다라고 생각하고 있고 중국 역시 마찬가지로 북한을 그런 시각에서 서로 보고 있기 때문에 이 삼각관계는 항상 좋지 않았고 서로 뭔가 스트러글 썸씽이 있었던 그러한 관계였었는데 이번에 60년 만에 이 세 나라가 뭉친다는 것은 여러 가지로 많은 시그널을 주는 것입니다.
The trilateral relationship among North Korea, China and Russia had always been a squeaky one. There was not the balance that's needed. That's because Russia through North Korea was trying to influence China, and the same thing was attempted by the Chinese, that they were attempting to influence Russia through North Korea. However, that trilateral relationship became much more solid at this time, and we noticed that through the victory parade.
특히 이제 AI 시대를 맞아서 앞으로는 아마도 중국이 컨트롤하는 중국의 AI 컴퓨팅 시스템을 활용하는 나라와 미국이 컨트롤하는 미국의 AI 컴퓨팅 시스템을 활용하는 나라로 갈라질 확률이 상당히 높습니다.
now that we have entered into the AI age, there's a chance that we would have two different groups. One group would be led by China and countries that are using and employing the Chinese AI technologies. And then the other group would be led by the US and those who are using the US technology and US chips.
그렇기 때문에 특히 미국은 동맹국들을 중심으로 해서 이 AI와 관련된 어떤 컴퓨팅 파워를 같이 공유하고 서로 협력하면서 이런 어떤 그 연대를 키워나가는 전략 이런 것들이 저는 더욱더 필요한 시기다라고 보고 있습니다.
This is the time when the allies need to be more strongly allied with one another. Alliances need to be shored up. And especially true because the computing power, most of it will be coming from the US.
중국은 이미 그러한 다가올 그러한 세계를 예상하고 남미, 아프리카, 동남아시아 국가들 중심으로 해서 이런 어떤 모든 것들을 지금 현재 제공하고 있습니다. 그러한 팔러시를 갖고 있습니다. 그런데 미국은 지금 자꾸 프로텍셔니즘으로 나가고 있는데 저는 이것이 앞으로 미국과 동맹국에게 그렇게 좋은 전략은 아닐 것이다라고 생각하고 있습니다.
China anticipates and envisions a world where they would be leading such a bloc. They are getting more support from South America, African nations, and South Asia. Chinese are doing that very well. However, at the same time, the U.S. is going the wrong direction. It's seeking protectionism and becoming more isolated.
Thanks. I think it's very clear what you're saying about the United States and South Korea's position on our current foreign policy trajectory. I have I kind of want to ask two quick questions before we go to the audience. Number one, looking to the future. You've talked about this is the AI revolution and possibly a significant revolution in the history of humanity, really. You know, if the start of, as you said, the start of the framing is at the start of the universe, the start of life, and now the start of AI. Do we have enough global governance on AI to protect ourselves from this growing revolution? What can we do if not? I often think of this very much like kind of the global commons in terms of global governance. We think of the Outer Space Treaty as being this thing that we wrote in 1968, and it's nowhere near comprehensive enough for what we have today. AI could be even more impactful on us even than that already. And of course, space is part of all areas of foreign policy, national security, and economic activity on the ground around the world. So what do you think we need to do for global governance and AI to make sure we're protected and also can benefit in this new technological revolution?
그동안에 AI와 관련된 정책과 관련해서 유럽은 이것을 어떻게 좀 더 규제하는 쪽 그리고 인간한테 이것이 선하게 사용하는 쪽으로 유럽은 정책을 택해 왔었습니다.
When it comes to AI policies, Europe have looked at more regulations. They were looking to ensure that AI would be used for the humanity.
미국은 반면에 이것을 AI를 산업화하는 쪽으로 좀 더 규제보다는 레볼루션을 더 선호하고 그런 쪽으로 방향을 잡아왔었죠.
However, U.S. had taken a different approach. U.S. was looking at it more of a industrialization. They're looking to revolutionize the human activities. And so industry came first rather than the regulations.
그것은 아마도 자동차 산업이 영국에서 시작했지만 영국이 붉은 깃발법이라는 것을 만들어서 자동차가 마차보다 빨리 가지 못하도록 하는 규제를 함으로써 그 자동차라는 것이 산업적으로는 미국에 와서 싹 터졌다는 그런 어떤 경험 그런 것들이 작용했을 것이다라고 생각하고 있습니다.
We have seen this happen before. In the United Kingdom, they came up with the automobile manufacturing first. However, they had a red flag rule. Under this rule, the cars cannot be faster than carriages. And that's why UK could not advance faster than the US. When the same technology came to the US, Americans were able to build cars that ran faster.
그런데 지금 우리가 이 AI 시대를 맞아서 우크라이나 전쟁을 봤을 때 이 우크라이나 전쟁에서 상상치 못했던 일들이 벌어졌었습니다.
There are things that we could not even have imagined that's now happening in Ukraine.
러시아의 푸틴은 이 전쟁은 일주일 내지 한 달이면 끝날 것이다. 재래식 전쟁, 그러니까 과거에 군대를 사용하는 그런 어떤 그 전쟁을 통해서 승리할 것이다라고 전쟁을 일으키기 시작했는데 이것이 지금 약 2년 이상, 3년째 지금 접어들고 있지 않습니까?
Putin boasted, give me 1 week, maybe 1 month, and this war will be over. He was thinking in the traditional sense. However, that's not what happened in Ukraine. We still have this war ongoing, maybe into the 3rd year already.
그렇게 전쟁이 길어진 데 대해는 예를 들면 무인 드론이 사용된다든가 아니면 일론 머스크의 통신을 다 푸틴은 끊었다고 생각했는데 일론 머스크의 그 프라이빗 통신이 사용된다든가 하는 이러한 기술 전쟁으로 이제 이것이 바뀌었기 때문이다라고 생각합니다. 네.
That's because now we have these technologies. We have the drones. We also have Elon Musk's satellites. Putin wasn't thinking about these things, these technologies, but they are being employed now.
그래서 우리가 이러한 그 우크라이나 전쟁을 통해서 우리가 배운 것은 이제부터는 어떤 인간을 해치는 그 양상들이 대부분 다 무인 로봇, 무인 드론 이러한 것들로 이제 양상이 바뀌고 세상이 그렇게 바뀔 것이다. 물론 공장도 마찬가지겠습니다. 네.
So what we have learned from Ukraine is that going into the future, the ones that hurt the people, the humanity, would be unmanned drones, unmanned technologies, including robots.
그래서 조금 전에 교수님께서 질문하신 대로 우리한테는 지금 AI를 좀 더 인간한테 선하게 쓸 수 있는 글로벌 거버넌스가 필요한 시점이고 그것의 리더십, 그것의 이니셔티브를 저는 미국이 그것을 가져가면서 함께 살아가는 어떤 그런 그 정책을 펴야 되지 않을까 이렇게 생각하고 있습니다.
Going back to Ben's question as to the need for global governance, yes, I do agree. We need to find a way to make sure the AIs are used for the goodness of the humanity and that they must work for the humanity. And in order for that to take place, we want global governance, and I am for one, for the U.S. to take leadership in this area and take leadership in that arena.
특히 미국의 경우에는 AI 파운데이션 모델을 갖고 있는 나라이기 때문에 더욱더 그 이니셔티브를 가져간다는 것 자체가 굉장히 중요하고 그러나 이 파운데이션 모델을 갖고 있다는 어떤 그런 파워가 영원하지는 않을 것이라고 생각합니다.
America is the birthplace of AI. They have the foundation models, foundation technologies, but I don't think this is going to be forever. And that's why we need to be more mindful.
그래서 저는 이제 이런 어떤 미국이 이니셔티브를 지면서 글로벌 어떤 그 연대를 가져가는 시간이 지금부터 3년에서 5년? 이 시간을 넘기게 되면 그 다음에는 누가 이 AI 시대의 파워풀한 그 파워를 쥐게 될지는 지금부터 하기에 달렸다. 그렇기 때문에 좀 더 미국에서 컨센서스를 가지고 이러한 부분을 좀 심각하게 생각했으면 좋겠다 하는 것이 제 생각입니다.
And that is why I believe the initiative must be taken now. For the global governance relating to AI, I want to see the U.S. rise and take the leadership. I believe we only have a very short window for that to take place, maybe 3 years from now. And after that, the chance may be lost forever.
Well, the challenge is for all of us to help with that amount of leadership and cooperation. Let's go out to the audience now. I'd love to ask 1 or 2 questions. We'll start with Trudy. The mic coming up.
Thank you. Trudy Rubin from the Philadelphia Inquirer. You mentioned Ukraine. I wonder what is the view from Asia and from South Korea about the importance of the Ukraine example in showing how the allies in Asia and the United States and Europe must work together on AI weaponry to push back against what Russia is now developing. And secondly, on Korea, there have been news reports that Russia is helping North Korea develop advanced Shahed drones. And I wonder how that affects the threat to South Korea.
네, 필라델피아 엔콰이어의 기자 trudy 루벤입니다. 질문은 두 가지가 되겠습니다. 첫 번째 질문은 우크라이나 관련되어서 우크라이나의 무기를 어떤 식으로 앞으로 AI와 접목을 시켜야지만 러시아가 가지고 있는 그런 현대 무기들에 대응을 할 수가 있을까요? 그것이 첫 번째 질문이고요. 두 번째 질문은 한국 관련되어서 러시아가 지금 북한에 드론 관련된 기술을 제공하고 있는 것으로 알고 있는데 이것이 대한민국에 큰 위협이 되겠습니까?
첫 번째 질문에 대한 답은요. 결국은 AI의 파워는 세미컨덕터의 파워에서 나옵니다. 그러니까 지금 그 러시아가 가지고 있는 그런 어떤 AI와 관련된 기술이 미국이나 이런 어떤 서방 세계의 것을 능가할 수는 없습니다.
Thank you, Ms. Rubin. As to your first question, when it comes to AI, the basic technology comes from semiconductors. So it's the power of semiconductors that you have that would enable you to utilize AIs.
그러나 러시아와 중국이 합치게 되면 상황이 바뀝니다. 그러니까 중국은 그 파운데이션 모델을 미국으로부터 받아들여서 그것을 옵티마이즈 최적화하는 데에 포커싱을 하고 있기 때문에 이것이 그 중국의 기술과 러시아의 기술이 만약에 합쳐진다고 했을 때 이것을 우리는 굉장히 심각하고 경계해야 된다라고 생각하고 있습니다.
I believe we still have the upper hand because of the semiconductors that we have, the semiconductor technologies in the West. However, if China and Russia were to come together and combine their technologies, they would become a formidable foe that we need to be really mindful of. Especially China. Chinese have their foundation models, which came actually from the US. However, they have optimized the model and they have become much of a threat.
그리고 러시아가 북한에 제공하는 드론 기술이라든가 이러한 것들이 사우스 코리아에 분명히 위협적인 요인이고 그것은 우리가 그 러시아와 북한의 그런 거래 관계를 그냥 스쳐 지나가듯이 해서는 결코 안 된다라고 보고 있습니다.
And Ms. Rubin, as to your second question, the threat of the Russia providing technology transfer to North Korea, yes, it is a much bigger threat than that's been publicized. And we are very watchful as to what's taking place between Russia and North Korea. And it's not something that we take lightly.
Okay, great. Another question? We'll do two more and then do them together. So one and then two. Okay. All right. Okay. Yeah.
Thank you so much for being here, Minister. It's been really a pleasure. I'm a second-year Wharton MBA student. I guess my question is, we talked a lot about AI being like US and China being the AI superpower. And I started to question, like, what is the rest of the world supposed to do as the two countries feel very, very ahead of the rest of the countries? So, is there, for example, for Korea, how should we position ourselves as the two countries are leading ahead? How should the rest of the world think about this?
That's one, and then we'll take one more.
So it's pretty related. Thank you so much for being here. I'm a first-year Wharton student from Ecuador. And I want to know your perspective on how the developing and emerging economies, what role can they play in the AI revolution and on the new AI-led world order?
Okay, yeah, so the interpreter actually lost the first question. Maybe if she speaks Korean, you can ask the same in Korean as well.
미국이랑 한국이랑 둘 다 이제 AI가 슈퍼파워라고 말씀을 해주셨는데, 그러니까 rest of world은
다시 한번 미국이랑 어디
중국이 이제
중국 네.
해주셨는데 다른 나라들은 그러니까 AI에 대해서 어떻게 캐치업을 해야 되고 대응을 해야 되는지에 대한 질문이
파운데이션 모델이 없는 나라에서는 그 파운데이션 모델을 활용해서 소버린 AI를 만들어야 되는데 이 소버린 AI를 만드는 방법은 버티컬 AI로 가는 수밖에 없습니다. 네.
The interpreter thanks you. So when it comes to foundation models, you need to adapt from it, and the technologies need to advance. And at some point, you would have to have a sovereign AI, and that means there has to be some vertical AI developments to take place.
그 버티컬 AI라 하면 말 그대로 수직적, 그러니까 어떤 전문 분야를 들어가는 거죠. 그러니까 예를 들어서 국방, 그 디펜스 쪽의 그 여러 가지 데이터들은 외부로 나갈 수가 없지 않습니까? 각 나라마다. 그러니까 그러니까 국방과 관련된 데이터를 축적해가지고 그것에 관한 버티컬 AI로 나가는 길. 또 의료와 관련된 거는 각 나라의 국민들이 개인의 어떤 그 데이터이기 때문에 이게 프라이버시와 관련돼서 이것이 교환되기가 그렇게 쉬운 일이 아닙니다. 그래서 이런 분야들을 찾아서 그것을 버티컬 AI를 소버린 AI화하는 방법, 이제 그런 방법이 하나 있을 수 있다라고 보고 있습니다.
When it comes to vertical AI, my thoughts are that there's a need for specialization. You can't be generalizing and doing AI in every field. You have to specialize in certain fields. For example, defense industry, you can't be sharing data with other countries, obviously. So this is one area where you could be specializing and vertically integrating for an AI. And another area would be medical field. You don't want to be sharing data with everybody. However, you still need to be able to farm these data for your own specialized needs. So these are the vertical AI fields that you could be looking into.
두 번째 방법은 최적화의 방법입니다. 그러니까 예를 들면 이건 약간 전문적인 이야기이긴 합니다만은 floating point 64 이거는 AI for Science 슈퍼컴퓨터에 사용되는 거지 않습니까? 근데 이거를 floating point 8 그러니까 floating point 8으로 범용화해서 그만큼 더 많은 데이터를 돌릴 수 있고 그도록 만들었는데 만약에 이것이 floating point 4로 동작이 가능하다, 작동이 가능하다 이런 경우에는 그 파운데이션 모델보다도 이것이 더 중요해지는 그런 결과가 나오겠죠. 예를 들면 딥시크와 같은 것들이 이런 어떤 옵티마이즈의 좋은 예다라고 볼 수가 있겠습니다. 네.
And the second way of achieving that would be optimization. You have floating point 64 that you can arrive at using a supercomputer. However, you can also have floating point 8.
Floating point 8 is AI supercomputing.
AI supercomputing, and then you can have floating point 4, which is more like the DeepSeek from China. So once you get to floating point 4, you can say that these are better than foundational models. So this would be another area you could be looking into.
네, 그다음에
Oh, and then there was a second question. 두 번째 질문은 이 이머징 컨트리들이 그들이 그러면 이미 이 선진 국가들이 AI를 장악하고 있는 상황 하에서 어떤 역할을 할 수가 있는지 아니면 어떻게 해야지 살아남을 수가 있는지.
두 번째 질문하신 거는 아까 이야기했던 그런 소버린 AI와 버티컬 AI와 같은 굉장히 유사한 팔러시를 취할 수밖에 없는 그런 상황이고 이 파운데이션 모델을 갖고 있는 미국의 빅테크 5가 1년에 사용하는 예산이 450조입니다. 450조인데 이런 어떤 어마어마한 예산을 쫓아갈 수 있는 나라는 지금 존재하지 않습니다. 이 지구상에. 그렇기 때문에 이 빅5가 계속해서 아마도 이 시장을 계속 장악할 것이다라고 예측이 되는데 그것이 그러면 언제까지 가능할 거냐? 그것은 아마도 양자컴이 완전히 상용화되는 그 시점이 되면 뭔가 또 파워 체인지가 오지 않을까 그렇게 예측을 하고 있습니다. 그래서 만약에 예를 들면 지금 AI 파운데이션 모델에 뒤져 있다고 생각하는 나라인 경우에는 하나를 스킵해서 양자컴의 하이브리드, 그러니까 기존의 슈퍼컴퓨팅과 양자컴을 하이브리드하는 그러한 시스템에 투자하는 것도 첫 번째 방법 중에 하나입니다.
My interpreter apologizes if he had butchered your question. Anyway, responding to what's been interpreted as the question, so you have to work on sovereign AI for every nation. You need to find ways to have your sovereign AI, and that means you have to focus in what you want to invest in. And there might come a point where, for example, quantum computing becomes much more affordable and you would be able to invest better into quantum computing. Part of the issue for these smaller and emerging countries is that there are big 5 companies in the US able to invest heavily up to about 3,000 billion or $3 trillion into foundation models, and you can't compete with that. There's no nation, not even nations, who are able to compete with these big 5 companies, and that's why you need to be able to specialize and focus in what you invest in.
예를 들어서 일본 같은 경우는 인터넷 시대에 뒤졌습니다. 그러니까 그 피어리어드가 2000년부터 약 2020년 그 사이에 일본이 인터넷에 뒤짐으로써 일본은 이 시기를 뛰어넘고 AI와 양자컴에 투자를 많이 했습니다. 중국 같은 경우에는 크레딧 카드 시대를 완전히 지워버리고 QR코드로 넘어가 버렸습니다. 이런 것처럼 기술이 뒤처졌을 때는 그 다음 단계에 투자를 하는 것, 이러한 팔러시가 저는 필요하다라고 보고 있습니다.
Let me give you an example. For Japan, they fell behind in the internet ages. Between 2000 and 2020, they fell way behind in internet technology. However, they have invested heavily in quantum technology and also in AI technology. So they were able to leapfrog the internet age. The same thing with China. They didn't have credit card and they didn't have the credit card economy. What they did was to introduce QR code economy. So they leapfrogged the credit card economy also. And it all points to phases and timing.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for the great questions from the audience. I'm going to take moderator prerogative to ask you one last broad question. This is, after all, university, and we have many young leaders here. I would be remiss if I didn't emphasize how impressive your career has been and how diverse it has been, from being the first Korean correspondent in Moscow as the wall fell at the end of the Soviet Union, to being an author and a minister and engaging in international technology policy and small medium enterprises and all of these sort of things. What sort of advice do you have to Penn students and how they can be a difference in the world and pursue their various fields in a way that allows for international leadership?
저는 유펜을 굉장히 좋아합니다. 왜냐하면 여기는 다른 대학교에서 느낄 수 없는 그 전통 같은 것이 있습니다. 네.
I love UPenn. That's because
Okay,
here
thank you. Oh, no. Oh, please.
I can see that there's tradition that I do not see in some of the other schools.
더군다나 이 필라델피아라는 곳은 미국이 그 prosperity 번영하는 그런 어떤 기초를 갖고 있는 역사와 함께하는 곳이지 않습니까? 네.
Especially so, this is Philadelphia, where the prosperity of the U.S. found its roots.
그래서 저는 늘 그 스티브 잡스의 이야기를 항상 강조하고 싶은데요. 인문학과 IT의 만남이 굉장히 중요하다라고 스티브 잡스가 이야기했었죠.
I am fond of Steve Jobs' statement that there is a meeting point where the liberal arts and IT meet.
그것처럼 유펜은 미국의 기초, 그러니까 파운데이션을 만든 역사와 그리고 유펜만이 가지고 있는 어떤 그 여러분들의 열정이 항상 믹스하는 곳이기 때문에 여러분들이 AI 시대의 리더가 될 것이고 그리고 여러분들이 미래가 될 것이다. 저는 이렇게 확신하고 있습니다.
I believe UPenn is where the tradition and the technology are meeting together. And I believe there's a great future for the students of UPenn, and I wish you the very best.
그리고 특히 세계를 흔들고 있는 일론 머스크, 또 트럼프 모두 다 유펜 출신이지 않습니까? 그래서 여러분들이 더 목소리를 크게 내고 그분들이 잘할 때는 크게 박수 쳐주고 또 그분들이 잘못할 때는 잘못했다고 크게 비판하고 하는 것이 미래를 향한 우리의 큰 걸음일 것이다. 이렇게 생각하고 있습니다. 네.
And of course, as the place where Elon Musk and Mr. Trump came, I would be amiss if I didn't mention these two great names. When they do well, you must provide applauses for these people. And also when they do wrong, please criticize them heavily and loudly.
Thank you very much. Thank you.